Congressman, thanks for joining me.
Delighted to be with you.
So you had the opportunity to question Kash Patel, the FBI director, during a hearing today in Congress. There was a lot of focus on the fact that he had staked so much of his reputation, so much of his credibility on this idea that he was going to be the guy to come in and expose all of this wrongdoing as it relates to Epstein that had been covered up by these deep state operatives, only to then basically become the very problem that he criticized for so long. Did anything in his testimony give the impression that he is that he's going to be true to his word that he gave when he was a podcaster, as opposed to what it seems like he's doing right now, which is just perpetuating a cover-up?
No, he's in full-blown cover-up mode. And it is really mind-blowing because I confronted him with just video snippets of him saying, this is totally within the control of the FBI director. He's got the black bag. He can release it, put on your big boy pants and show us who the pederasts are. And I just turned it around and I said, so what do you say? Are you going to put on your big boy pants and show us who the pederasts are? And then there was a lot of hemming and hawing and kind of pointing fingers at the federal courts. And their whole deflection ploy has been to say, well, we asked the courts to release the grand jury material, which is a totally irrelevant distraction. The government has just mountains of evidentiary data, investigative data that they've gotten. And then they're going and saying, we want the grand jury data from the old Maxwell and Epstein files, which were about Maxwell and Epstein, right, not about everybody else. So those judges, not only did they say, no, we're not going to release this under 6E, you've not shown reason why, they also kind of called them out saying, this is a deflection because you have a much greater mass of material that you could just release on your own, and you don't need this stuff, and it's pretty extraneous to what the public wants to see.
So back a few months ago or years ago, whenever he said it, when Kash Patel came out and said that really the buck stops with the FBI director, who of course was not him at the time, but was he telling the truth that the buck does stop with the FBI director, which would in turn suggest that he right now, as the FBI director, has the power to release exactly the files that he's claiming that he has no power to release?
Yes, overwhelmingly the buck stops with the FBI director. In other words, the greater mass of material out there is within the control of the FBI director. Everything they found when they went to Epstein's house and they were in his safe, all of the computers and the memos and the telephones and the photographs and the videos and so on. And they're focused on a very tiny percentage of the overall materials, which was grand jury material leading up to the indictment of Epstein or the indictment of Maxwell. Again, a small fraction of everything the government has and everything that the people want to see. So there were a number of false distractions like that he engaged in, which says to me, he's really just flipped over. He was demanding it. They thought it was to their political advantage to say, we want to come clean on everything. We're going to do it on day one and so on. And then when they get in, and he's deployed 1,000 FBI agents to pore over the material to look for Trump's name and to make a mark there and to redact it, then that's when they come back and completely flip over, do a 180-degree U-turn and say, nothing to see here. We're not interested in this anymore.
Is there anything to suggest that the FBI under Kash Patel's leadership is working toward transparency or accountability? Or does the sole project, the sole goal, the sole focus of this whole thing, is this just a protection racket for Trump?
I think it is. I mean, a great example is he repeatedly testified to the Senate during his confirmation hearing that there would be no political retaliation or retribution against people in the FBI. And yet there's all kinds of statements now by people at the FBI that that's precisely what he's doing. And he's forcing huge numbers of FBI agents out, experienced, talented, awarded FBI agents are being pushed out of the department, fired, sacked, demoted, told they've got to leave. Why? Simply because they had worked on the January 6th investigation and Trump wants them out, or they'd worked on the Russia investigation, the investigation of Russian infiltration and attacks on the 2016 election, the 2020 election, the 2024 election, and so on. All these people have been targeted for removal. So he's doing precisely what he said he wouldn't do, which is turning the FBI into an instrument of political revenge and retaliation against people.
Well, almost worse than that is even in the event of the Charlie Kirk shooting. I mean, he was basically live tweeting it and putting on his podcaster hat and live tweeting the thing, offering up fake information that was ultimately proven completely false because he can't get out of this frame of just being this political commentator. So to what extent is this harming the credibility of the agency that he's supposed to be leading right now?
Well, yeah, and that might just be general incompetence and inexperience on his part. I mean, he's, you know, one of the only people who ever became FBI director with no experience ever at the FBI. I mean, he was writing children's books about Donald Trump, about King Donald, and about the wacky wizard Kash who protects King Donald. I mean, this is the level of comic book fantasy world he lived in. And so suddenly he's head of the nation's premier law enforcement organization. And as you say, he thinks he's still some kind of, just online troll or blogger or something, and starts, live tweeting things he's hearing from afar about the investigation. And he had to retract a number of his statements.
Can you talk about his unwillingness to respond in any of the correspondence that you had sent to him over the last 8 months?
Well, we've been trying to raise all kinds of things, especially about the personnel matters and the ongoing Stalinist-style purge of FBI agents. They're using polygraphs basically to cross-examine FBI agents as to their political loyalty to Donald Trump. And so we've been trying to raise these things and get an answer from him. And we've simply not gotten an answer. He doesn't even send me form letters saying it's been received. It just goes out into the ether. So I said, we got a lot of stuff to talk about. Of course, we were all limited to our 5-minute question spot, and they didn't want to do another round or a third round. I mean, we could have gone for a long time on this. So we're going to have to get some answers from Attorney General Bondi when she comes in that we never got from Kash Patel. Of course, I think we did have more substantive exchanges than took place over in the Senate when he just started screaming and yelling over the senators. He did some of that today, but I think that his team must have told him that that's not a very effective communications tactic for the director of the FBI.
I know that this is a little bit of an unfair question to ask you to get into Kash Patel's head, but what do you presume Kash Patel, the podcaster, would say if he saw an FBI director being asked these questions point blank, very simple questions about the Epstein scandal, about this effort to basically bury any accountability or transparency? What do you think that he would say if he was still in his capacity as a political commentator?
He'd say that's an FBI director in full-blown cover-up mode who's covering up for the deep state. He would definitely say that. I mean, we just learned from the 4 CEOs of major banks like JP Morgan that there were $1.5 billion worth of financial transactions that they identified as suspicious activity going through Epstein's various accounts. That doesn't sound like, just sort of a prostitution ring on the corner. $1.5 billion. I mean, my colleagues across the aisle went crazy for the SARS reports about Hunter Biden, which were around $20 or $25 million. And here we've got $1.5 billion going through this international child sex ring. And we tried to get a subpoena of these bank CEOs, and every Republican, except to his great credit, Representative Massey from Kentucky, voted against it. But Massey voted with all the Democrats to subpoena these documents. Jamie Dimon released a statement right after I first raised it saying, essentially he'd be happy to comply, and they're sorry they ever had anything to do with Epstein. So, I think the banks would welcome the opportunity to come clean with all the information they've got.
On the Massey front, to your point, he is the only Republican who seems to be engaged in any effort toward transparency. What is the sense among your Republican colleagues who are actively voting to suppress transparency as it relates to a notorious pedophile and the people that he surrounded himself with? I mean, these were people who during the campaign were perfectly content to exploit this issue if it meant they can derive some political benefit. But now that they actually have the power to substantiate their own promises from September and October and every month before that, now they're the ones actually perpetuating the cover-up themselves.
Well, in fairness, Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Nancy Mace still have their names on the discharge petition. And we added one more vote on the Democratic side when Jerry Connolly's seat was filled by Congressman Walkinshaw. So now we just need one more Republican, if my math is correct, but one or two more Republicans to add their name to the discharge petition, and we will be able to put a bill on the floor, which will have to pass overwhelmingly, saying release all the files, because even the people who aren't signing the discharge petition say that they would vote for that. But you're right. I mean, the truth of the matter is that there's a lot of fear operating on the Republican side, and some of it is fear of political retaliation. Some of it is fear of all of the death threats and violent threats that are out there today. And then some of it is, frankly, just tribalistic thinking. We live in very tribalistic times. And so you saw the center of gravity on the GOP side just switch on a dime from release the file, we want to know what's in there, this is sick, this is a deep state conspiracy, to no, we're not interested anymore, we're willing to go with the president. Simply because Trump changed his mind. That is tribalistic and I think humiliating, obsequious and sycophantic psychology, but it has really saturated our politics now.
What about the prospect of the Epstein files being released to the House Oversight Committee? Is that any different than the effort that would be put forward if the discharge petition passes? Are you trying to do them in tandem for some reason? Is there some greater degree of transparency that we would get if the discharge petition passes?
Well, right. The whole point is we're passing legislation with the discharge petition that would command the surrender of the entire file. In other words, it would no longer be dribs and drabs,
right,
parceled out in little political micro doses.
Right. I think the first batch had 97% already public files included in that
they
tranche.
were releasing old press releases and old newspaper articles. And I mean, it was ludicrous just so they could say it was a big batch. It's not the stuff that they want us to see that we want. It's the stuff they don't want us to see that we want. And we're afraid, of course, that it could be destroyed. It could be redacted in the meantime. And so we don't want any more dilly-dallying around this. We want to just get the file, exactly what Kash Patel, exactly what Donald Trump was talking about before they came into office and they were able to review the file themselves.
And finally, let's finish off with this. I know that the Republican effort right now is to try and basically convince, well, actually, I don't really know what the convincing is, but to try and persuade the base that for some reason, the same Epstein files that they staked all of their credibility on releasing now have to be suppressed. And again, I don't know if it's because they're trying to claim that it was some deep state plot that's been concocted by Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and James Comey and Clapper, or whatever it may be. I don't know what conspiracy theory we're up to right now. But what would you say to the folks who, in part staked their votes on this Republican Party based on the idea that they would seek some accountability for this heinous pedophile, and only to watch these people now again engage in the same cover-up that just a few months back they were decrying?
And what we're getting is deep state double talk. I mean, what Kash Patel was saying was, oh, we brought these motions to the Epstein and Maxwell judges to release the grand jury material, and they said no. Here's what Judge Berman had to say about this, because these judges, not only did they reject the request and explain precisely why, but they also called the bluff of the Trump administration. So here's Judge Berman. This is on page 7 of his ruling in the United States of America versus Epstein, which came out in August. And he goes, the government's 100,000 pages of Epstein files and materials dwarf the 70 odd pages of Epstein grand jury materials. The government's Epstein files are sui generis, that is, they're one of a kind. They are investigatory and not subject to Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 6E. In other words, Kash Patel comes to us and says, well, the court says that we can't release all of these materials because of Rule 6E about grand jury materials. Those aren't grand jury materials. Those are independent materials that have been collected by the government. And then Berman goes on to say, the government is the logical party to make comprehensive disclosure to the public of the Epstein files. By comparison, the instant grand jury motion appears to be a diversion from the breadth and scope of the Epstein files in the government's possession. So you even have a federal judge saying, basically, don't make us a party to this fraud on the public.
Right. And I think, Kash Patel himself said it best, that the buck stops with the FBI director. So if we're looking for the person responsible for secreting all of this information, Kash Patel just has to consult a mirror. Congressman, as always, thank you for the time. Thanks for continuing to fight on this front. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian, so much.